From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now! You are tuned in to Democracy Now!'s special, Expanding the Debate. Now, as we were going to air today, we learned that a major court decision has come down, to the surprise of everyone in North Dakota, because it's a Sunday night of this three-day weekend of Columbus Day, or other people celebrate as Indigenous Peoples Day. A three-judge appeals court decision has come down in Washington, D.C., denying an injunction being sought by the Standing Rock Sioux tribe in North Dakota as they attempt to stop a $3.8 billion pipeline from being built from the Bakken oil fields of North Dakota through South Dakota, through Iowa, and then Illinois. Thousands of Indigenous people from South America, Central America, the United States, and Canada have gathered at encampments to try to stop this pipeline. We're joined in studio by Gyasi Ross, who's an author, speaker, lawyer, storyteller, member of the Blackfeet Nation, author of How to Say I Love You in Indian. His recent article for Indian Country Today Media Network is Native Americans need Hillary to actually be an ally against the Dakota Access Pipeline. So this is breaking news, Gyasi, that we all just learned because the decision just came down. Talk about the significance of this and where these presidential candidates stand.
Thank you very much, Amy, for having me. The decision itself on a Sunday, specifically the Sunday before Indigenous Peoples Day / Columbus Day, is kind of a surprise. But really, it shouldn't be a surprise. The antipathy with these courts, United States courts, treat Native communities, and specifically treat Native communities as opposed to capitalistic ventures. This is big money, as you mentioned. And you know, there's, unfortunately, on the good side, it won't affect the organization that's happening out there on the front lines in Standing Rock and Cannonball, North Dakota, where those natives, those thousands of natives that you mentioned, are out there, whether day or night, cold, rainy, dry, it doesn't matter. They're committed to the cause and aren't reliant upon a federal court for validation of this movement, that they need to save this water, not just for the benefit of our communities, even though that's very important, but in fact for the benefit of millions and millions of people, both native, non-native alike. And so they're doing that irrespective of which the federal court says. Regarding this particular debate, I'm thankful, as the professor mentioned, that these revelations came across, because hopefully it'll teach all men, including myself, including a lot of other men, to up our level of understanding and willingness to engage and entertain distasteful comments. That's something that is, I think, a referendum on all men, you know, and I think that's very important. However, there is the part where I fear, as the professor mentioned, that most of the energy at this debate is going to be committed to these particular comments and the piggishness and disgustingness of these particular comments and this attitude, and not towards substantive areas. So, for example, in regards to the Dakota Access Pipeline, well, the Democratic Party at the Democratic Convention said this would be the most progressive platform in regards to climate change that this nation has ever seen. However, there's been no substantive follow-up to what that means in regards to how are we going to actualize this. Well, one way we can actualize it is by stopping this Dakota Access Pipeline. The fact is that this pipeline cannot commence without any federal approval. And so if there's no federal action, or alternatively, if a federal agent kills this deal, then the pipeline doesn't continue to go forward. And so if Hillary Clinton, candidate Hillary Clinton, truly wanted to live up to what she says, that this will indeed be the most progressive platform in regards to climate change, and we want to do something affirmatively outside of just cap and trade deals, this is a good starting position for that.
What questions do you think ought to be asked tonight of the candidates on climate change, on tribal treaties?
Well, thank you very much for that question. And those are two separate questions. Donald Trump, unfortunately, showed his cards very early, like 23 years ago, of how he felt about treaty rights, when he talked about how Native communities should not be able to engage in economic development activities because he didn't want the competition. And so he doesn't see...
In terms of building casinos.
That's right. And so he doesn't see tribal governments as legitimate governments that should be able to challenge and develop our own institutions. Hillary Clinton, as the column mentioned, says she's an ally. She has wonderful Native advisors, and those wonderful Native advisors have said that this is likewise going to be the most progressive platform in regards to their treatment and understanding of that government-to-government relationship, that these are in fact relationships that are sealed with treaties that you only do with governments that you enter into as equals. However, not the lack of willingness to even enter into those conversations, whether it be in regards to Dakota Access Pipeline, to what do treaty obligations mean, that's kind of troubling that those waters have not been ventured into at all. So if I were to pose a question, I would say, well, what does a treaty relationship and a trust relationship mean to you, Hillary Clinton, somebody who's supposed to be an ally to Native communities?
Speaking of climate change, it's believed more than 900, and the number could well exceed 1,000 Haitians have died as a result of Hurricane Matthew. The horror of what climate change looks like, the toll it takes. We wanted to go back to Gyasi Ross, author, speaker, lawyer, storyteller, member of the Blackfeet Nation, author of How to Say I Love You in Indian. His recent article for the Huffington Post, Native Americans Need Hillary to Actually Be an Ally Against the Dakota Access Pipeline. Now, Gyasi, right before we went on air, appeals court decision came down, a federal appeals court decision, 3-0 vote against the Standing Rock Sioux tribe in North Dakota, getting an injunction against the building of this $3.8 billion pipeline. The presidential debates so far, both presidential and vice presidential debates, did not raise the issue of climate change. Here, at the end of the debate, an audience member asked about the fossil fuel industry and fossil fuel workers. What is your response to that and what you feel needs to be done and whether you heard what you wanted to hear from Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton?
In regards to the whole debate, I didn't hear really anything. I thought, as Professor Crenshaw, who I actually had in school, and she was a tough grader, as she mentioned, Hillary Clinton had the opportunity to really put pressure on Donald Trump. And she failed in those opportunities, from criminal justice reform, which, as the professor said, there was this news that Donald Trump was completely unpenitent regarding the Central Park Five. And she had the chance to put pressure on him, and she didn't do it. She missed that opportunity. In regards specifically to energy policy and climate change policy, I was glad that the question came up. And she mentioned some key words, some kind of buzzwords regarding energy independence. She said we need to continue our energy independence. Of course, what she didn't mention, and I think this debate and this whole cycle, in fact, is going to be more known for what they didn't say, for what they didn't talk about, than what they did talk about. So what she didn't say with energy independence, and specifically in regards to Dakota Access Pipeline, but slightly more broad, is that, when we're talking about energy independence from the Middle East, we're talking about fracking. We're talking about horizontal drilling. We're talking about violating treaties, tar sands oil, poisoning native bodies, poisoning native babies at the expense of, it's to make sure that we have energy that's domestic. And so she didn't mention any of that. She didn't mention the ongoing controversy, the case that was pending before the Circuit Court of Appeals. And now, unfortunately, the injunction has been lifted, and those folks in Cannonball, North Dakota, are still out there protecting our water sources. They didn't mention any of that, the human stories behind that. And I think that touches on a larger theme that's unfortunately been true of many, many presidential elections and campaigns, is that these candidates, rightly or wrongly, or all judgment aside, other than Barack Obama, never made Native people a part of that discourse. They've never normalized conversation about Native people. And that can be obviously very discouraging from somebody specifically who's supposed to be our ally. We know what Donald Trump thinks about many, many brown-skinned people within this nation. But to see our allies, our supposed allies, get into these platforms and have the opportunity with a very specific question about energy policy. How do we reconcile sustainable energy policy well, maintaining the economic development that comes as a result of that. And they gave it to her as a softball, and she chose not to include any of the human lives and the stories and the controversies that are currently pending before her.
Well, we want to thank you so much, Gyasi Ross, for being here with us. Member of the Blackfeet Nation, a storyteller, lawyer, author of How to Say I Love You in Indian, and we'll link to his piece at the Huffington Post, Native Americans Need Hillary to Actually Be an Ally Against the Dakota Access Pipeline. This is Democracy Now!'s War, Peace, and the Presidency special report, Expanding the Debate. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh as we bring in Jill Stein, who's in